franktalks.com.
A reading from Terry Gould, The Lifestyle. Hi, I'm Zoltan, and welcome to another edition of Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles, a reading from. This week's reading segment comes from Terry Gould, The Lifestyle, pages 27 to 29. There's a tale the president of the Lifestyles organization likes to relate about the moment he realized he would spend the rest of his days publicly fighting for swingers' rights. I first heard this tale when I arrived at LSO headquarters in the summer of 1996 and found Robert McGinley on the phone with a couple of members of Dallas's Inner Circles Club recently arrested in a raid that had also netted a house full of their white-collar friends, including a Drug Enforcement Administration agent and his partner. When McGinley got off the phone, he turned to me and began to tell his Pebble story. He said he'd named the story after an incident in a children's novel in which an Etruscan warrior, vowing to avenge the devastation of a town, picks up a pebble and carries it with him as a reminder of the change in his consciousness. McGinley's Pebble story takes place in 1966 in Washington, D.C., outside the headquarters of the Department of the Air Force. The compactly built and bearded 33-year-old was then an aerospace engineer employed by the Bendix Corporation to design and test some of the most sophisticated electronic systems in America's aircraft arsenal. He was a civilian, but in his line of work he needed a security clearance, subject to military regulations, which included a code that oversaw the sex lives of all uniformed personnel. The week before, McGinley had been summoned to Washington from his office on California's Travis Air Force Base, where the top-secret SR-71 spy plane was being tested. The charge against Tech Rep McGinley was sexual deviance. Walking beside McGinley on the road to his epiphany was a senior bureaucrat named Cronin, the head of an investigation team that monitored the sexuality of soldiers. Without legal warrant, the Air Force had been intercepting McGinley's private mail and then turning it over to Cronin's team, which had been working its way through a web of sexual intrigue that spidered out from almost every military base in the country. One of the strands they pulled from the web led to the hapless McGinley, then in the middle of a divorce from his fundamentalist Christian wife. Some months before, McGinley happened to have answered an ad placed by a sergeant's wife in a swinger magazine. Her erotic reply to him and his reply to her had brought him to this moment. Overhead, a Huey chopper was hovering so that McGinley and Cronin had to shout to make themselves heard as they approached the building where McGinley was, in effect, going to be court-martialed for the crime of composing steamy prose. He was terrified of ruin. He had 5 children to support, debts to pay, and he was totally dependent on his security clearance. If he lost that clearance, he was afraid he'd never get a job in his field again. He'd be fixing television sets. I said to Cronin, "Sir, I swear it never occurred to me that if I wrote a letter to a swinging lady, I would become a security risk." Cronin, 6 feet tall to McGinley's 5'5", and with eyes that never lost focus from a point 1 yard in front of his hat brim, informed McGinley that his team had some 50,000 cases of swingers under investigation. The government had reached the trigger point when it came to this threat, and they were going to remove it by court-martialing and discharging all involved. God, I was naive, McGinley remembered. In fact, never forgot for a second. I said, "Why? Were there any swingers who were communists?" "Because communists in those days were traitors," Kermit said. "No, but swinging leads to blackmail by communists, ruined lives, marriage breakups, suicides, and lost jobs." So I sat there at the hearing and heard them say the same thing over and over again, how swingers ruin themselves. And when they told me they were revoking my clearance, and I began to collapse inside, it hit me. Swinging didn't cause what I was feeling. They caused what I was feeling by doing this to me. That was the Pebble. That turned my whole life around. I thought of the 50,000 people going through what I was going through for what? And I said under my breath, "You bastards, you have picked the wrong guy to do this to." As I would learn, it was one of the ironies of McGinley's life that the Department of the Air Force, which rejected him and launched his career as a swinging activist, unwittingly worshipped the memories of America's first modern spouse sharers. According to 2 doctors of sexology named Joan and Dwight Dixon, who have been in the lifestyle since the 60s and writing on sexuality in journals for 2 decades, the original spouse sharers were none other than World War II fighter pilots. The marital exchanges that Cronin had been determined to wipe out, because they supposedly led to marriage breakups and ruined lives, first emerged as an Air Force ritual that united families into a clan and provided an insurance policy for wives. And that was an excerpt of The Lifestyle by Terry Gould. If you would like to read more about this, consult The Lifestyle by Terry Gould. This was Zoltan for Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles, a reading from segment. If you have a suggestion of any literature you'd like us to review dealing with pleasures and lifestyles, please let us know now. Send an email to frank@franktalks.com. That's frank@franktalks.com. Or visit our website at www.franktalks.com.
Remember to sign up for the Alternative Relationship Choices ARC newsletter and get weekly tips to guide you through polyamory, swinging, and the basics of non-monogamy. We can help you find your ARC, your alternative relationship choice. Sign up at franktalks.com now.